What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the revealing of the Indianapolis Colts at number 20 in my NFL Power Rankings. I'm actually expecting this to be a pretty consensus spot for the Colts. NFL.com has them at 20, ESPN 19th. These guys are coming in one spot ahead of their division rival Titans. That Titans video, by the way, provoked a lot of people, as I thought it would, having them much lower than most people would. But on that note, real quick, I understand wanting to dislike one of these videos. I get it. I'm an NFL fan myself. There's no more fans more passionate than NFL fans. If you hate my opinions and want to swear off my channel, then I can't stop the dislikes from coming. And I've never really been one to ask and beg for likes on my videos. I figure they'll come if the content's good enough, but given the nature of this series specifically, I am going to ask you guys, if you are enjoying this series, if you've learned new things about these teams, or if I've given you a platform to construct your own opinions, or you're just enjoying them in general, I do ask you consider hitting that like button. It just helps me know that you are in fact enjoying these videos that frankly take a while to put together, and it lets me know that you want more of this content. So that's enough of that. On to the Colts. This is a team that I don't think needs too much explanation. It is well known that this roster is one of the worst in football. However, they happen to have one of the 5 best American football players in the whole world in Andrew Luck. Luck is the 4th best quarterback in the league, in my opinion, and he is one of maybe 5 quarterbacks that give your team an honest chance to win every week, no matter who the other 52 players listed in the program are. And although things haven't been going well for the Colts recently, we have seen Andrew Luck carry very similar rosters into the playoffs and even win playoff games with those teams. Now, the fact that they haven't been able to do this recently is reflected in them being in that number 20 spot, which is pretty low. That's almost a top 10 pick. But it is still ahead of a lot of good football teams that have fallen here in these last few episodes, and I can't stress and I can't keep saying enough how good the NFL is this year. And having them ahead of a lot of those teams is solely 100% thanks to the guy in the white and blue jersey with number 12 on his back. And we'll talk more about Andrew Luck when we get into the depth chart section of this video, but we know this offense will be good. The question then becomes how good, rather how bad will this defense be? Can this new look defense be good enough to be, I don't know, top 24? That would probably be all this offense needs to make the playoffs. And it's hard for me to say, but we will certainly dissect this defensive depth chart in a minute. So this Colts team has an over-under of 9, and I'm taking the over. Maybe the biggest reason for this is the fact that this team gets a third-place schedule as we look at it here. When I picked out these games, they came out with 10 wins. It's not that bad of a schedule, especially compared to the Titans that we just looked at last episode. You know, 4 of their first 7 games are against total bottom feeders. So they could definitely start off strong, and that we've seen really helps teams get that motivation to win close games down the stretch. So here is what it looked like for this team to win 10 games, which I think is totally doable. 11, however, might be slightly too optimistic in my view. So they're 2-1 to win this division. I still think the Texans are the class here. However, 2-1 is certainly not a bad bet when only a game or two is separating these two teams by the end of the season. Super Bowl odds, 33-1. That's sort of where my optimism stops for the Colts. I just don't see this team putting together multiple wins in a row in the playoffs, and likely it would have to be on the road in order to go and win a Super Bowl. Obviously, Andrew Luck, they have a chance, but there's just other teams that I think I would be taking here. And until I can see what that defense really looks like, which is a totally new defense this year, then I'm just not ready to bet on this team to win the Super Bowl. So moving on to talk about the depth chart here in Indianapolis. It's a very sloppy depth chart. It's not a good roster, like I said, but you do start with Andrew Luck there. I have him as the 4th best quarterback in football. He comes in as a 92 in terms of my Madden rating, which again is 4th. The one thing I will add is EA has Andrew Luck as 8th, which is way too low for me. He's clearly at least top 5 or 6, just based on the fact that he can do everything, and you have to take into account the amount of help that he's getting, which is not much. So just another reason to use my roster there. He's just an incredible quarterback. He is one of those few quarterbacks that can put his team on his back. He extends plays. He's good in the pocket. He does still throw too many interceptions. I'm not going to say way too many. He's really had a poor offensive line lately, and his receivers outside of T.Y. Hilton have been suspect. But I do think he needs to improve that decision-making to not necessarily take the next step, because he is all the way up there towards the top, but it could only help if he could limit those turnovers, keep that defense off the field as much as possible. In terms of depth, we've got Scott Tolzien, the old Green Bay backup, and Stephen Morris. So let's just hope nothing happens to Andrew Luck. No more Matt Hasselbeck as the backup. And then at running back, Frank Gore still kicking at 34 years old, total Iron Man. I've had people message me saying that I have Frank Gore too high. I mean, I have him as an 80 overall, a very average starting caliber running back, which I think is pretty fair for him. I mean, sure, he's not explosive, but he still knows how to angle himself and pick up gritty first downs. He's a pretty good receiver out of the backfield, and he showed a little more speed than I think most people are giving him credit for. I'm not saying he was exploding back there, but he definitely still has some athleticism. Then Robert Turbin, he's just kind of a muscly burst guy. He'll probably get some work on the goal line, but not a whole lot of finesse there by Robert Turbin. Marlon Mack gets drafted in the 4th round out of USF. A lot of people like Mack. I don't necessarily love him. I think he reminds me a lot of James Starks, which is probably more of an insult than a compliment. And then Josh Ferguson, a guy we thought we might see him kind of fill into that role a little bit last year, never really stepped up. And then Christine Michael still on the depth chart, though I'm pretty sure he got hurt pretty bad. So we probably won't be seeing Christine Michael, and I'm not buying into Michael on his 8th NFL roster here. At receiver, T.Y. Hilton, I have always liked, but he's really growing on me the more I watch him. I now have him ranked as the 7th best receiver in football. I just think he is just really underrated hands. Everyone knows about his speed and his quickness, but just that combination of route running and hands, it's almost, I don't want to say Antonio Brown-esque, but, he's not that far off. And then the rest of this depth chart, Dante Moncrief, he's just a career number 2 to me. I know he's super young and he has that physical upside, but he just hasn't really been able to click. And I've never really bought into Dante Moncrief. That's just kind of a personal thing, though. I know a lot of people could see him exploding into a really dominant receiver here and an awesome compliment to T.Y. Hilton, but I just feel like he's had his opportunities. And I know Luck's been hurt over the last 2 years and they haven't really had a fair chance, but I'm not buying Dante Moncrief. And then Philip Dorsett can pretty much be coined a bust, former first-round pick. It was a criticized pick from the get-go, as this team should have gone defense there, and Dorsett really has not helped this offense at all. Pretty much Tavon Austin-esque, but even less athletic. And then they bring in Kamar Aiken. I actually think we're going to see a lot of Kamar Aiken. I think he's got fantasy sleeper value. It would take something happening to either Hilton or Moncrief, unfortunately, but just a veteran guy that's going to be there for Luck if he's on the field. And then after him, it's a pretty big drop-off. They have a collection of undrafted free agents: Tevon Smith, JoJo Natson, Chester Rogers, Chris Briggs, Quan Bray still there. Man, it's a pretty thin group of receivers after T.Y. Hilton, if you're not high on Moncrief, but especially after Moncrief. And then at tight end, it's not much better either. I mean, Jack Doyle is a average caliber tight end, just a smart player that is going to be good in the receiving game, does some good run blocking, but never going to be an elite tight end. We'll see what Eric Swope has to offer, former basketball player. They also have Mo Alley Cox, so they're really going for that former basketball player pedigree. But Eric Swope has been in the league now since 2014. This is probably going to be the year that he's going to have to say, I can play tight end in the NFL. If that happens, very intriguing athlete and an explosive offense, a guy to definitely monitor in terms of fantasy football. And then Brandon Williams, more of a blocking tight end, rounding out some undrafted free agents. Probably not going to make the roster at tight end. And this offensive line has slowly been improving over the last couple years. Definitely still not a good group, though. Anthony Costanzo is a fine left tackle, more of a pass blocking guy than a run blocking guard. More of a poor man's David Bakhtiari there on the left side. Jack Mewhort, best lineman in this group, left guard, though not a dominant left guard, a very solid left guard nonetheless. Ryan Kelly, the former first-round pick center out of Alabama, had a good rookie year. Going to have to keep growing to establish himself, but definitely on a forward trajectory. So that so far is very solid. A lot of teams would like to look like that from left to the center. But then you got Joe Hag, played a lot of right tackle last year. He looks like he's going to move to guard, compete with Denzel Good and Brian Schwenke maybe, but not very solid there. And then the right tackle as well is going to be a competition. It looks to be LaRaven Clark. Can you just imagine if this Colts team was able to build around Andrew Luck like some of these other great offenses have done? Like, imagine if he had Atlanta's receivers or the Redskins group. I mean, Andrew Luck would just be a monster. But regardless of that, he is going to lead this offense to be a top 8 group or so. It's the reason I have them over the Titans. I still think it's a better offense than the Titans despite the supporting casts. But the question's going to be this defense, which, let's go through here. It's really a bunch of Band-Aids. Like, all across the board, it's a bunch of free agent pieces put together. There's very few starters here other than the new rookies that were actually drafted by this team. I mean, just the starters, you've got Kendall Langford, Henry Anderson, I suppose. We're talking about the D-line here. Henry Anderson was drafted by this team. Him and Kendall Langford, Margus Hunt, these guys are all going to kind of rotate as the DNs here. I do like Henry Anderson. And then the nose tackle, this is probably the strength of this defense, is the depth at nose tackle, but you can't start 4 nose tackles. So it's really, the depth doesn't really matter there. I don't think these guys can play a ton outside of a 3 technique. Jonathan Hankins gets signed from the Giants. David Perry actually played really well last year, former 5th-round pick for these guys. They signed Al Woods, who I talked about a little bit last episode, a really underrated nose tackle. Ty McGill, a former Seattle player that jumped over to the AFC, and Josh Boyd there as well. So the D-line really doesn't have any stars or even studs, but they have a decent amount of depth that they can rotate, and maybe they really just want to focus on getting fresh guys in there to at least help stop the run, because they're not getting much of a pass rush here in Indianapolis. And then they do have some guys still developing here. Hassan Ridgeway, a 4th-round pick from last year. LeVar Edwards, who came over from Carolina. And Grover Stewart, who was a 4th-round pick this year. Now moving on to this group of linebackers, it's more of the same, just a collection of free agents, guys put together. Jabal Sheard comes over from New England. John Simon comes over from Houston. Those guys look to be the starting outside linebackers. Competing will be Terrell Basham, a 3rd-round pick, intriguing athlete who I thought was going to be a D lineman. He's like 280 pounds, but it looks like he's going to be playing outside linebacker. Barkevius Mingo, we all remember him as a former top 10 pick who has flamed out for Cleveland and flamed out in New England. And boy, if you flame out in New England, you're probably not a good football player. And Dontrez Mount as well competing there. On the inside, it's not very good. It's Sean Spence coming over from Tennessee. Antonio Morrison, probably going to start there. He kind of took over the starting job last year. And then Anthony Walker, I am very intrigued by. By the way, I do like a lot of these picks, and the Colts went defense heavy this year, which they haven't done in the past. So Anthony Walker, rookie out of Northwestern, I would not be surprised one bit if he won the starting job here and became the #1 linebacker in Indianapolis. You got John Bostic, Luke Rhodes. Edwin Jackson played a decent amount last year. So they seem to be trying to get good athletes in there to fly around and, again, help in the run defense. Anthony Walker, the one guy that has some pretty good upside all across the board as a 3-down linebacker. Jabal Sheard and John Simon, just to talk about the new edge rushers there. Is it an upgrade from what they had last year with the 40-year-old edge rushers and Trent Cole and Robert Mathis and Eric Walden as well? I mean, maybe. I think John Simon is a really good linebacker, but he's not a true pass rusher. He was definitely solid for the Texans last year, but I think he's more of a 4-3 outside. And then Jabal Sheard basically disappeared last year after having a big 2015 in New England. So I still think this pass rush is going to be pretty damn bad. And then in terms of the secondary, you've got Vontae Davis, who I think his downfall has been a little overstated. I think he's still a really good corner. And by the way, not easy playing cornerback for the Indianapolis Colts over the last couple years. With that pass rush and that surrounding secondary, not going to come down too hard on Vontae Davis for that one. Same as I have for Joe Hayden in Cleveland. And then Quincy Wilson, second-round pick out of Florida. Thought he was okay. Not an awesome athlete, but a smart player. He's probably going to start here. I don't see them going to Rashawn Melvin. Darius Butler there. I've talked a lot about Darius Butler. I've kind of put my neck out for him, but he's pretty low on the actual depth chart. He started at safety last year, and they bring in Malik Hooker, so that might be taking his spot there. I feel like Darius Butler's going to fight his way into at least the nickel, and if that's the case, he's a very good nickel back. Just a very instinctive player who is very well-rounded. I mean, his coverage is more based on his head than his body, but really good instinctive player in run defense too. So I would love to see the Colts find a way to get Darius Butler on the field. And then behind those four, Chris Milton, Daryl Morris, Tevin Mitchell, really nothing. You're hoping those four can grow and stay healthy. And then at safety, you got Malik Hooker, Clayton Geathers. Hooker was highly, highly touted, and the Colts kind of got a steal here, probably the general consensus steal of the draft, other than maybe O.J. Howard. Scouts had said that Malik Hooker was one of two true difference makers in this draft. A lot of people thought he could have gone second overall. They get him at 15 or wherever they pick. If he can be something of an Earl Thomas, it's going to significantly help this defense. That's a big if, though. Maybe he's more just a ha-ha Clinton Dix, which is a very good player, but Clinton Dix isn't back there saving the Green Bay secondary. Then Clayton Geathers, the strong safety, good, serviceable, strong safety type. And then TJ Green, the depth here, pretty much. I mean, the rest of the guys listed here on the depth chart aren't even in my Madden roster. They do get Tyson Graham, an intriguing athlete who is more of a good athlete than a good player, out of one of those Dakota schools. So I would think Darius Butler would instantly plug in at safety if one of those guys went down. TJ Green, kind of the freak athlete type. Not really sure what kind of player he is. We haven't seen any tape from him at the next level. So that wraps up the look at the depth chart here. Again, it is this defense that the success of the season is really going to depend on, because we know the offense will be great. I have this team winning 10 games, sneaking into the playoffs, but I don't think they're going to go too much further than that. So let me know what you guys think. Do I have this team too high, too low? Colts fans, are there any players that I missed out on that you think I'm too high on, maybe too low on? Definitely let me know. Again, guys, consider hitting the like button. It really helps me out, and we'll see you for number 19 in about a day or two. So peace out, everyone. Have a good one.